By the time this video goes up, week 3 of the regular season will be done. I'm going to be putting these teams all in some categories that I thought just off the top of my head, and I'm going to do it as fast as I can to keep this video as short as possible. Group A is going to be the expected beasts. These are teams that I fully expected to be where they are after a couple of weeks, and they don't necessarily have to be contenders. Some teams are just great in the regular season. Group B is the pleasant surprise group. These are the teams that I didn't expect to look so good so soon, but I'm definitely happy to see them where they're at. Group C is disappointments. The name of this group is self-explanatory. Group D is bad but no surprise, which is also self-explanatory. And then I have Group E, which is just on the mark, right? These are teams that I feel should be right where they are by this point early in the season, and most likely how I feel they're going to be towards the end. So Group A, I'm going to start with the Denver Nuggets. They haven't skipped a beat. They still look like the best team in the league, 3rd in offensive rating. They're 6th in defensive rating, leading the league in field goal percentage. They're 2nd in assists. It's just a ridiculously good team. They just lost Jamal Murray to a hamstring injury for what looks like all of November, but this is a team that has so much contribution across the board, I'm not too worried about them, and it's why they're an expected beast. 76ers are up next. Did I think they'd be number 1 in the conference after 3 weeks? No. Did I expect them to be a regular season beast? Yes. Harden drama or not, Tyrese Maxey is insanely good, and without Harden, it just means more Maxey. Embiid is Embiid, right? Nick Nurse, one of the best coaches in the league. The Sixers are 6th in offensive rating. They're 4th in defensive rating. They lead the league in blocks per game at 7. They were 27th in pace last season, and so far after 8 games, they're 11th in pace. It's a small sample size, but with Harden and Embiid together, the offense was just so much slower. And with Maxey getting way more opportunity and Harden out of the mix, I'm not surprised to see this massive difference in pace. Up next on the expected beast is the Boston Celtics, 2nd in the conference at 6-2. We know about the new look Celtics. We also know that this team is right where we all expected them to be, which is either at the top, if not number 2 in the East. This is a great offensive team with now even more space to work with thanks to Porzingis taking that Robert Williams spot. It's also a great defensive team at 3rd in defensive rating, but I do have one serious problem with these guys, and it's the same one I had last year, which concerns me to talk about yet again. When you have all that spacing, thanks to elite shooting, why not take advantage of it and just get to the rim more often? As a defense, when you're guarding a team that's legitimately playing a deadly 5-out offense, it's very hard to help on drives because you're going to give up open threes. The Celtics are leading the league in 3-pointers attempted at 43.6. The Celtics are also 29th in percentage of 2-point field goals attempted. So these guys are banking on 3-point shooting too much for my liking, and it could come back to bite them when the shots don't fall. I'm not a fan of just going out there and shooting a bunch of threes when you have guys with size and athleticism that can get to the rim. But at least their defense is more than solid, which is always going to keep you in games when your offense isn't showing up. Nonetheless, this is an expected beast, and it's the last one on this group. Group B, pleasant surprise. I'm going to start with the Indiana Pacers. They've played some bad teams, but they did beat the Cavs twice. They beat the struggling Bucks recently, and are sitting on a strong 6-3 start with a 3-game win streak. They're number 1 in offensive rating. They're number 1 in assist to turnover ratio, number 1 in assists per game, and they're sitting top 3 in 3-point percentage. The team's just an offensive machine right now, and it's really their defense that has to be better. Last year they were awful. This year it's no different. 26th in defensive rating. They can't stop anybody. I expected good things from this team, but 3 weeks in, I did not expect them to have this strong of a start. Up next is the Dallas Mavericks. After an awful preseason that obviously doesn't matter much, it did concern me just a little bit heading into the season because I was very optimistic about Dallas in the offseason after seeing them draft Derek Lively, who's shown a lot of value to this team already. Offense was never going to be a question, especially when you have 3-point shooting surrounding 2 offensive talents in Luka and Kyrie. I still have my doubts about this combo, and while I have them here in my pleasant surprise, I do have to acknowledge their relatively favorable schedule. They beat the Spurs, the Nets, the Grizzlies, the Bulls. They did lose to Denver, then beat the Hornets and Magic before losing to the Raptors, and then just recently beat the Clippers. So they've had a lot of games where they were expected to win, but either way, it's good to see this team off to a great start. Classic Mavericks though, in terms of being second in offensive rating, but then 24th in defensive rating. And Jason Kidd talked about being comfortable playing in high scoring games in the 120s. Not so sure that's a good formula if you want to win a championship. The team's just got to be better on defense, but a pleasant surprise nonetheless. Minnesota Timberwolves, third in the West at 6-2 with a 5-game win streak. And the story for this team has been their defense. Finally, looking like this team has an identity. Obviously, last year they had a lot of injuries, but right now they're number 1 in defensive rating. They're third in rebounding. They held the Nuggets to 89 points. They held the Celtics to 109. They're even 8th in three-point percentage at 37.3. And Karl Anthony Towns is having the worst shooting season of his career from 3 as of right now, but also just a great start for Anthony Edwards, who's at 40% from 3. He's at his highest points per game at 27.9. His field goal percentage is up. His free throw percentage is up. And it just looks like good times for the Timberwolves. So definitely a pleasant surprise so far. Up next is the Houston Rockets. Like the Timberwolves, currently sitting on a 5-game win streak. They're 5-3 after a rough 0-3 start, losing to Orlando. They lost to the Spurs. They lost to the Warriors. They then beat the Hornets, surprisingly beat the Kings not once but twice, and by wide margins. They obliterated the Lakers and then beat the Pelicans. This team went from 29th in defensive rating last season to now 8th so far. The Rockets were also 29th in turnovers and now sitting shockingly well at 4th. Still super early, but just a complete turnaround that makes me happy. Moving on to the Warriors, 4th in the conference, 6-3. To me, it's a pleasant surprise. Maybe to others, I'm being disrespectful by putting them in this group. This team was always a turnover machine. 30th last season on that front, now sitting at 10th in turnovers, which is not a surprise when you swap Jordan Poole possessions for Chris Paul possessions. Just less mistakes, steadier offensive possessions in general, less random offense. It's just more methodical when you have a guy like CP3 out there. But here's where I feel is the pleasant surprise. They're currently 17th in three-point percentage. They're also 21st in pace, which is a huge dip from being number 1 last year. So they're playing slower, and they haven't shot as well as they typically do either. But they still find themselves here in the standings, so yes, given those early dips in numbers, I am pleasantly surprised to see them off to a solid start, especially when they started some games without Draymond. Also, Steph's having an absolutely insane season so far, so I can't move on without mentioning that. Dude is playing at an MVP level. Group C, which are the disappointments, number 1, and I don't have these groups in order, but to me, by far, the most disappointing team has been the Memphis Grizzlies. Did I think they'd be great without Ja? Of course not. No Brandon Clark, no Steven Adams, but would I still think this team would have 1 win after 9 games? Hell no. They're the only team that has just 1 win so far after 3 weeks of play, and this team just can't score. They're also a middle-of-the-pack defense, and without Ja, teams are having success just locking in on Desmond Bane and Triple J, since help from the others hasn't really been there. It's an absolute disaster start for this team. I hate to see it. I hope they somehow turn things around, but it just looks really bad right now. Up next is the Cleveland Cavaliers. Shockingly poor start at 3-5, sitting at 12th in their conference alongside the expected bad teams like the Hornets, Bulls, Wizards, and the Pistons. They've had a relatively tough schedule as I read these teams they've faced. They played OKC twice and lost both games. They split their games against the tough Knicks. They did beat Golden State despite shooting 29% from 3. They also lost twice to the Pacers, who are on an offensive tear right now. I know it's early, but I did expect this team to be above or even at least 500 by this point, especially how disappointing they were in the playoffs. I just thought they'd come into the first few weeks with more of a chip on their shoulder, but I'm sure they'll turn it around soon enough. At least I hope so. Up next is the Milwaukee Bucks. 5th in the East. Most people thought this would be an absolute juggernaut right out of the gate, myself included. I get that there's no Drew Holiday and that the team would see somewhat of a difference defensively. I certainly did not expect this far of a dip. The Bucks were 4th in defensive rating last year. They're sitting at 25th in defensive rating right now. They're allowing 120.3 points per game, which puts them at 25th in points allowed. This team can't defend anyone right now. It's mind-boggling how bad this team is defensively, and I told you guys on my Bucks reaction video that I was concerned about having a rookie head coach leading the way for a team like this that's ready to win right now. I can't blame Adrian Griffin entirely because he can't control the players' individual effort, but it's not like he's dealing with an entirely new squad either. Most of the core group is still here, which is why I do question the coaching. So I'm super disappointed in what this team has looked like on the defensive end, especially when Adrian Griffin is seen as a defensive-minded guy. And just the way they've lost in some of these games is just awful. They got smacked by the Hawks, smacked by the Raptors. They let the Pistons score 118 on them. I just don't like how they're squeaking by some of these wins while also getting destroyed in some of their losses. Very disappointed in this team's effort so far, and I can move on to the next. The Lakers, a team that was all over the headlines in the offseason. A lot of people complained about how the Lakers were able to sign so many guys and also keep guys on great deals. The offseason looked great for them on paper, and yet the same conversation is here for this team, and that's the lack of effort. Where is it? These guys have had some terrible losses, and after so much was made about how the shooting was added to this team, they're sitting in familiar territory at 28th in three-point percentage. I also laughed when Darvin Ham mentioned yet again how he was going to manage LeBron's minutes at 29 per game. He's currently at 35 minutes per game, which is on par with last year. This team just doesn't look sustainable if he doesn't play more than 30 minutes, and I don't blame the coaching staff for trying to manage LeBron's playing time because of his age, but it's just not possible with the level the rest of the team is playing right now. Also, rest in peace to Anthony Davis's annual goal of playing 82 games after a couple of weeks, already out with injury, but that's no surprise. I will say there's a lot of new guys and it does take time to gel and find the chemistry, so I understand that too. Either way, they're definitely sitting in this disappointment group. Another team in LA, the Clippers, they finally pulled the trigger on the Harden trade and they've lost ever since. Not going to spend too much time on this team. My main takeaway is that either Harden or Russ need to come off the bench for this to work. Harden can't play without the ball. Russ was actually fine before Harden got there, but having them both out there just doesn't feel right to me. Either you have Russ back to his six-man role like he was with the Lakers, which he's already experienced and maybe it is more realistic to happen, or they somehow convince Harden to just do his thing with the second unit and not worry about having to play so much off the ball. I think either option will be better than both of them starting. It's just so often an unpredictable team, and I feel like they've become even more unpredictable now with the Harden and Russ factor on this team. Overall, just a disappointing team so far. Up next is the Phoenix Suns. I'm giving the Suns a pass because of early games missed by Devin Booker and Beal, but just looking at where they are at this point compared to where I thought they'd be after a few weeks, definitely disappointing for now. But I'm going to move on because I can't get a solid gauge on them without a bigger sample size of their big three playing together. My last one on the disappointments list, New Orleans Pelicans. We get really bad CJ McCollum news. They also have scoring problems with a 28th offensive rating so far, 20th in defensive rating as well. I was very high on this team, and I still believe in them. But this is not how you want to start the season, especially with how hard it is to win games this year. I'm very worried about the Pelicans, but I also know it's way too early, and that goes for all the teams I've talked about. But Brandon Ingram is at 20% from 3, which I don't expect to last, but it doesn't help either. The silver lining for this team is that they're still 4-4, with guys in and out of lineups, poor performances as a team in general, so that's a positive that the Pelicans fans can cling to, but with health always a concern with this team, it's definitely scary to think about. So I would say disappointing for now. Group D. These are the teams that are bad, but no surprise. And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to start with the San Antonio Spurs. Wemby's been a lot of fun to watch for the Spurs. I've also enjoyed watching Devin Vassell. They've had some good wins, but also some horrible losses. I dropped a small sample size breakdown video on WEMBANYAMA. I'll leave the link in the description for anyone interested in that. But this team is pretty much on track to where we expected them to be by this point. Chicago Bulls. I think we've been waiting on this team to blow it up for like 2 years now. They had a players-only meeting after their first game, and they're 3-6 right now. Bottom 10 in defense, bottom 10 in offense. I just don't understand what's taking them so long to just pull the plug while guys still have good value. They have a lot of good trade pieces. Obviously, Alex Caruso. They have DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine. Who knows what Vucevic is worth? I'm sure he's not too bad value-wise. I'm just waiting for this team to finally pull the plug, and I'm going to go ahead and move on from them. Washington Wizards up next. This is just a really bad team. No surprise at all to see them where they are, and I'm honestly going to move on from them. Detroit Pistons are an interesting bad team because they've had some injuries for sure, but also they've had some good chances to win some games. They turn the ball over so much though, 29th in turnovers so far, and they also foul a lot. They actually foul the most in the league at the moment with 25 fouls per game, and that's just going to kill you when you're already a team that can't really score and can't really defend at a high level. But bad stuff aside, Asar Thompson, Jalen Duren, they look really good. Shout out to Isaiah Stewart, aka Beef Stew, who I think is an underrated young player in the league. Portland Trailblazers, not surprised where they are at the moment, and now Robert Williams out again with injury, but this time for the whole season, so that sucks. Also, really bad start to Scoot's rookie season before he hurt his ankle. It just looks like dark times right now for this team, but not surprised to see where they are in the standings, but I hope Scoot Henderson is able to turn it around when he gets back. Utah Jazz surprised everyone early on last year, and here they are off to a rough start at 3-7, but they have had a pretty tough schedule, to be honest. First 4 games were against the Kings, Clippers, Suns, Nuggets, where they went 1-3. And it wasn't long before they also had to face a hot Pacers team and strong starting Timberwolves team. So they've had quite the tough schedule, but I'm not surprised to see them here at the moment. And then we have Group E, teams that are on the mark, right? I'm going to start with the Miami Heat. They're dead even so far at 4-4. They started 1-4 before going on their current 3-game win streak, but they're 27th in offensive rating, which doesn't really surprise me because it's on par with last year's. But 10th in defensive rating doesn't surprise me either. Team just plays hard. Shout out to Heat culture. This is a team that never makes much sense to me over the course of a season, just always a wild card that I stay away from when predicting them. They're also 4th in 3-point percentage. Tyler Hero got off to a good start before getting hurt. Bam's looked really good, and I haven't watched much of them so far, but I'm not surprised to see them as a 500 team going into week 4. The Atlanta Hawks, 4th in the East, 5-3. I did a breakdown of their first couple of games a couple of weeks ago, but this is a team I fully expect to be exactly where they are, if not maybe a spot lower, because of the talent on this roster, and Quinn Snyder being a good coach. They have good size around Trae Young, they have the athleticism, they have everything they need to be a top 5 or even 6 team in the Eastern Conference, assuming the Pacers drop down a little, the Cavs get back on track, and the Knicks just pick up steam. They're currently 5th in offensive rating, but still a bad 3-point shooting team. 21st in 3-point percentage, which always makes it harder for a team to get offense going if the threes just aren't falling. Trae's also just been terrible from 3, sitting at 28%, which surprises me after coming off a bad 3-point shooting season the year before. To see him continue this is pretty surprising. Jalen Johnson's been really good for this team. I just want to make sure I throw that out there before moving on. The New York Knicks. I paint them as a top 5 team in the conference, sitting just outside of that at 4-4, but it comes with an awful Julius Randle start to the season at 16 points per game on 31% from the field and 25% from 3. That level of shooting isn't going to last, and RJ Barrett's been shooting the lights out at 47% from 3, with also his highest percentage at the free throw line at 86%. So shout out to RJ Barrett for his great start as well. I'm going to move on to the Toronto Raptors. This is a team I was high on before the season. They're looking solid, but they still can't shoot threes at 18th in 3-point percentage. But they're 7th in defensive rating. They're 4th in fast break points. And here's what I love most about these Raptors. 5th in assists per game. They were 23rd last year in that regard. And this goes hand in hand with what their new coach Darko Rajakovic preached before the season. He preached more movement and just more team basketball in general. Shout out to Dennis Schroeder, who I also said would be really good in Van Vliet's place, and I'm going to move on now. Orlando Magic, pretty solid start to their season. I'm not surprised to see them currently in the play-in window, which is where I expect them to be when we get to the finish line. They've won some games where they weren't favored in, and also lost games they were expected to. But all in all, they've been really competitive, they've been fun, they're right where I thought they'd be after a few weeks of play. Jonathan Isaac, aka the Minister of Defense, is finally playing basketball, and he's got some nice highlight blocks. So I'm really happy to see that. Cole Anthony's been good, and it makes the guard situation more interesting for them, because Anthony Black's also shown great promise. Jalen Suggs was awesome against the Hawks in their loss. And Markelle Fultz also been a steady player for them, just a solid guard for these guys. Brooklyn Nets, Cam Thomas, absolute bucket. He's just been cooking teams night in and night out, and the Nets have had their share of injuries. Cameron Johnson was out for most of their games, which was a big loss, but I see them as a play-in team, which is right where they currently sit. They've been unlucky health-wise, so hopefully they can right the ship soon enough. Oklahoma City Thunder. My guys from the Last Storm podcast, who are insanely dedicated OKC fans, they're probably going to kill me for saying that this team is exactly where I pictured them to be after 3 weeks, but I actually asked them what surprised them most about their team, and they mentioned the maturity, the readiness that this team shows night in and night out at such a young age. And I have to agree, you're not going to beat this team easily, and this team is just so young, but so damn promising. Easily one of my favorite teams to watch on League Pass, and Chet Holmgren is on a ridiculously efficient tear. Love to say I told you so to the Chet Holmgren haters out there. The kid is special, but I say this is exactly where I picture them because of just how tough the league is right now. No wins come easy anymore except for a few god-awful teams out there, and it's my only reason for my expectation that they'll be like a 6th seed at the end of the year. I just think the Suns are going to eventually take off. The Kings, who I'll get to, should be better. The Clippers, you'd think, aren't going to be down in the standings for long either. I just can't give in to the belief that they're going to win 50 games. Moving on to the Sacramento Kings, I was going to put this team in the disappointing group, and I probably should have. These guys had the #1 offensive rating in history last year and currently sit at 21st. They're also 3rd in threes attempted, but they're 27th in three-point percentage, so the shots just aren't falling. And this is also a team not known for their defense. So while they're technically disappointing, I did expect this team to be in the middle of the pack because of a more difficult season in general, not catching teams by surprise this time around, and they technically would be exactly in the middle of the pack playoff seeding wise if they lost one less game. So not sure how many of these types of videos I'll do, but it was fun to just provide some quick thoughts on as many teams as possible in a relatively short amount of time. Thanks for watching this video. This is the All Things Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Vic Lopez, as always, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.